The ministry is a wonderful thing. Everybody ought to get a chance to preach the gospel. And to be a pastor is one of the most rewarding things that anybody can do. Well, that doesn't mean that every sermon, however, is successful. I did hear about a lawyer, a doctor, medical doctor, and a pastor who went deer hunting, and somehow or another they shot the same deer simultaneously. But they didn't really know which one gunned him down. So they decided, since the doctor understands wounds, that they would send him over to look at the deer to determine who actually shot him. He looked at the deer 10 seconds and said it was the preacher that got him. And the attorney said, "How can you be so sure of that?" He said, "Because the bullet went in one ear and came out the other." So you have to keep on firing the gospel gun. You never know when it might be just going through, to the other side. That's why I like to preach to preachers, though. You're always listening. And I'm always looking for outlines. I don't know about you. But some kind of illustration or sermon material that we might be able to incorporate into what God wants us to say somewhere else. But I want to talk to you about something more important than words. I want to talk to you for a few moments about winning attitudes. Did you know that you are the king or the queen of a kingdom of incredible power and potential? In fact, your ability to live a life of staggering success or of unspeakable squalor and disappointment depends on how you manage this kingdom I want to talk about. It will determine your joy in life, the quality of your relationships. It has everything to do with your level of success professionally. It will determine your stress level, whether you're able to turn rejection into accomplishment or fears into triumph. I'm talking about the kingdom of your mind. On September the 11th, 2001, we Americans were horrified when we saw 19 Islamic terrorists fly commercial jets into the Twin Towers in lower Manhattan. Shocked even more when we saw some of our very best citizens leap to their death rather than burn with this awful inferno that enveloped the upper floors. But the attacks were not over. Other terrorists flew a commercial plane into the Pentagon in Washington. Flight 93 went down in a field in Pennsylvania, because some heroic Americans would not allow that plane to become a missile of death. But if you go to New York, to Ground Zero, you'll find a plaque that memorializes the over 3,000 that died that day. And the plaque says that the human spirit is not measured by the size of the act, but by the size of the human spirit. And so it is. And I think because the human spirit in America is still strong, that we'll be able to win the international war against terrorism. It'll have everything to do with the attitude and the vision set by those in leadership and by the attitude of the soldier on the field. But it has to do with your attitude and mine as citizens of America. You say, well, David, when you talk about attitude and thinking, where do we find some advice and guidance on attitude? And of course, we find it in the Word of God. The Bible is still the constitution of the Christian civilization. It not only is the world's best seller, it's still man's best purchase. And the Bible is a roadmap on how we are to think. Because as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. How do we think? My mind immediately goes to St. Paul, that apostle supreme, when in the book of Philippians, chapter 4 and verse 8, he said, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are of a good report, think on these things. The verb think is in the imperative mood. It's action-oriented. You make the decision of whether you will put into your mind primarily those 5 great things. Focusing your mind, which leads to an attitude on things that are true, honest, just. Things that lead to a good report. You know, St. Paul must have been a positive thinker. If that's where he spent most of his time, he'd have been fun to be around, wouldn't he? He attracted people to him. That's why he had success in building churches. He attracted success to him because his mindset, his attitude was so positive and so contagious and so inviting. You say, who in the world lives like that? If I understand what he's saying, Christians are supposed to live like that. If I were to define attitude, I would say that it is an inward feeling expressed by outward behavior. You and I make decisions more on how we feel than anything else. But if we think right, our feelings will come around. And the feeling, the inward feeling, then will be expressed in outward behavior. It always is. Because you see, attitude is the advanced man of your true self. Not all attitudes are positive. One guy was boarding a plane in San Antonio, Texas, and he saw mistletoe hanging on the carrier for the luggage. And it wasn't even Christmas time. He said to the man behind the counter, "What is this mistletoe on the luggage carrier?" He said, "That means you can kiss your luggage goodbye." That's a pretty negative view about his work, wasn't it? Anybody ever told you that your face looks like a reprint of the Book of Lamentations? That bird that's singing outside your window when you wake up in the morning, is it a buzzard? You know, a lady got up one time in church to give a testimony, and she said, in the Bible it says, "In this world you will have tribulations, and I intend to tribulate." Every time you saw her, she was tribulating. She made a choice, didn't she? She made a decision about how she was going to live her life. But I'll tell you, anytime you and I can look in the obituary column of the newspaper and discover our name is not there, we've got a good reason to be positive. Apparently, God's made a good day, and He's put us in it. That's the way the psalmist David approached it. You know his words, don't you, in Psalm 118:24? "This is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it." He made a decision to rejoice. Every one of us gets up sometime in the morning so blue we can spit ink. That simply means that you're a human being. Somebody says because you got up on the wrong side of the bed. Doesn't make a bit of difference. You could bore a hole through the mattress and come out of the slats, you'd feel the same way. It just means that we're human beings, and yet we don't have to think like that and live like that. We can choose to say, this is a God-made day, so it must be important. And He's put me in it of all things. So I will rejoice, and I will be glad in it. Every day we can make that one choice that makes all the difference in the world for us. Now, we preachers have a responsibility, in my view, to help people with that, at least on Sunday morning. Is your worship service full of inspiration? Is it an uplift? We moved into our new building. It had some brand new offices and new furniture. Boy, it was nice. And two of my friends, Bob and Teresa Allen, gave me an antique clock to put on my credenza. And it's a beautiful thing. And it operates because that thing pendulum swings. If you ever tip it up, it can stop. And sometimes the guy that comes in to dust it off, he picks it up and it stops. Well, I get a little bit involved in other things besides winding clocks. So my friend Bob goes in every Sunday morning to wind the clock for me and adjust it time-wise and to get it going if it stopped. And I think, dear Lord, help me this Sunday morning when I speak to my people who come there so beat up, scratching for the dollar and trying to keep the car note current, facing criticisms, struggling and stumbling along the way. Maybe, dear Lord, if I can take those wonderful things that St. Paul said are the greatest things in the world of love and hope and faith, and maybe help to lift their attitudes and readjust the clocks of their lives. But if you'll do it every day, Sunday will take care of itself, won't it? Thinking right, choosing the right attitude every day. The late Christopher Reeve was interviewed on television by Barbara Walters in ABC News. And this was the man, of course, who played Superman in the movie. Powerful, strong individual. But he was thrown off a horse and rendered a permanent quadriplegic. There he is now sitting in a wheelchair. He can't even move unless he blows in this straw-like device that's connected to the wheels and gets it going. He can't comb his hair. He can't feed himself. He's totally dependent on his wife, Dana, who's there with him. I was amazed at the attitude of this man who was promoting now research to find out how to deal with spinal column injuries. But I was blown away by her attitude as well. She looked into the camera and said, "What you see here is not necessarily who my husband is. He is here." And she pointed to his head, his brain. He's still the man I married. He's still the man I love. He is what he thinks. And there are a lot of us who walk around every day and don't have to be in a wheelchair. But if we're not careful, we stumble through life because we don't think right. And as a result, our attitudes are not the kind that will enhance the glorious message of Jesus Christ. Let me just say a word or two here. I don't want to go too far with this, but I do want to suggest if you want one choice to make about thinking, then you're thinking right if you forget the past. That's pretty important. St. Paul said that forgetting those things which are behind, you can't park your life by either your successes or your failures. We're in the midst of football season and teams are winning or losing every Saturday. I was astounded that all three of the major universities in Mississippi lost Saturday. But you know, if they think about that loss, and that's all that's on their mind as they go through this week of practice, it's almost for sure they won't win next Saturday. You get a losing mindset, losing attitude. Don't park by your failures. And listen, when a team wins, they better not think about that too much. That'll bring them down because they get too confident. Putting the past behind you is a big thing because we're living the present and the past is not the present. Jesus didn't let adversity, rejection, or betrayal keep him from his destiny. That's why we can't look back to the adversity and the rejections that have come your way and the betrayals of people. Get over it. Let it go. That is not going to affect you unless you let it affect you. Jesus could have written a book entitled The 7 Secrets of Failure. And each storybook on the chapter could have read like this. Chapter number 1, society called my birth illegitimate. Chapter number 2, I was born into a hated minority, the Jews, who experienced brutal political oppression. Chapter number 3, the oppressed church called me a heretic and a demonized apostate. Chapter number 4, the state called me an insurrectionist too dangerous to live. Chapter number 5, one of my closest friends sold me out to the government for 30 pieces of silver. Chapter number 6, I was tried and convicted without a fair trial. Chapter number 7, I'm the creator of heaven and earth, but I was treated like a criminal and executed on a cross. Now, you and I perceive all of that from quite a different perspective. But if you'd gone through that yourself, 7 classical secrets of failure. But Jesus turned it all into a marvelous victory. And when he went back to heaven in the resurrected form, he could be a great high priest for you and me because he sat where we sit. He lived the life of a human being, so we have not an high priest who cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities. And we can come boldly to his throne because of it. And I'll tell you, you don't have any burden to carry that Jesus can't help you carry. There isn't a mountain too high, but what the Lord can help you scale that thing. Whatever it is you're dealing with, Jesus has been there before you. And you know what he said in the face of all of this? The betrayals, the denials, the resurrection, the adversity in his life? He said in John 16:33, be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. And so can you. Slip your frail hand in his divine hand. And you can be of good cheer. Because by his strength, you won't be defeated by the past. Dr. Lewin mentioned that I've had some tragedy in my life, and I'll tell you one thing that I can give you out of that God has helped me to see. Maybe the most important thing I learned outside of my walk with Jesus himself. And that is learn to accept what you cannot change. You might want to write that one down. Something's going to happen to you you wish you could change. You can't change the fact that a loved one or a dear friend has died. You would like to. But you have to move on with your life or you'll be caught in that cycle of grief that keeps you negative and bitter and angry. With God's help, you have to accept what you cannot change. Some cannot change the fact that a spouse said to you, I want a divorce. Now, I speak to people every Sunday who have gone through that. Probably not here. But if that's happened to you, you're not going to change it. All the tears, the rest of your life won't alter it. Accepting what you can't change. You cannot change the foolish choices your grown children have made. I don't know how many parents who have children that are grown and on their own now, and yet they are down and depressed and defeated all the time because of the choices, the foolish choices their children are making today. I mean, maybe that beautiful daughter of yours did marry a deadbeat. That aspiring son of yours who was handsome and had all those abilities may have married a basket case. But you're not going to change it. Learning to accept those things that cannot be altered will give you an emotional balance that's so important for a leader in the Christian world. So, I guess I'd say to you, the past is over. Let's go on. Have you gotten over those skeletons that Satan still brings up to your mind? Those sins that brought you shame so many years ago? He even suggests to you that maybe they were more severe than you think, and even God won't forgive you of that. And there's a constant accusation of the God of this world against you. Moses was a pretty good leader, wasn't he? 4,000 years ago is when he died. He walked to his funeral. That's pretty amazing. He went to Mount and talked with God face to face. He became Israel's liberator. He wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. Pretty potent. Do you know before all that he was a murderer? He was the number 1 public enemy in Egypt. Fled for his life. Lived 4 decades of his life, 40 long years in the backside of a wilderness as a shepherd. I can't think of anything more noble than being a shepherd, but I can't think of anything more mundane than taking care of sheep 7 days a week. He wasn't even expecting God to meet him when he threw himself across his path at the burning bush. But he got it all squared away there, didn't he? God did not determine the future of Moses because of his past. God could handle his past if Moses would give him his future. Getting past the past. Some people think they're too far along to get into the ministry and do what they ought to do when God's calling them. Of course, Joshua and Caleb didn't think they were too old when they were 80. And some say, well, shoot, they lived a long time back in those days. Well, we aren't talking about the days of Methuselah. Joshua and Caleb, 80 years old, they were 80 years old. And yet when they got into Canaan, they said, give me this mountain. They wanted the tallest mountain where the biggest giants were. That's an astounding thing. Attitude. Of course, that all started for them when they were young. They got into the land of Canaan with 10 other spies and said, boy, this is a beautiful land, we can take it. But you know what the 10 said? I'll read it to you. Numbers 13, verse 27. This land truly flows with milk and honey, which means that's a pleasurable, luxurious place to be. It surely flows with milk and honey, but... circle that one in your mind. But we are not able to go up against the people. Do you know that in the Hebrew construction of a sentence that the word translated but canceled out everything before it? Every promise God made to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob for the promised land, it canceled it all out. And they went into the wilderness and everyone died that was not 19 years of age or younger, except Joshua and Caleb. They're 80 years old. They didn't bleach the desert suns with their bones. They had an attitude of faith and hope and victory in Jesus. And at the age of 80, they were still climbing mountains for the Lord. Well, we got to quit saying, I could, or I would, but. Change the attitude. Today, with God's help, I will. With God's help, I'll accept all the grace He offers. Struggled with this matter of sanctification. Today, with God's help, I will accept the grace He offers by the power and presence of His Spirit in my life. Claim the victory that's yours. It's not I would, but it's I will today with God's help. I will be a minister of the gospel. I'll not vacillate about this. God's called me. I'm going to do it. I'll go to those foreign fields. I'll do what God's called me to do. Quit hugging the tree trunk and whining because other people are enjoying the fruit. Climb out on the limb where the fruit is. Get the right attitude. Reach out for the brass ring and stand in the winner's circle. You can do it. You can do it with God's help if you choose the right attitude.